There was a man named John. John lived in a small hut at the foot of the mountains one day. A snowstorm started, and John was trapped in his hut as the snowflakes hit the window. A sense of fear rose in John. He approached the window to see what was happening outside. But the snowstorm was so severe that it was impossible to see outside. John sat by the fireplace inside the hut and started reading a book. However, while reading the book, he began to hear strange noises from outside the hut. These sounds were more than the howl of the wind. It was as if someone or something was watching him outside. Despite his fear, John decided to go outside. The snowstorm was still ongoing and visibility was very limited. However, John felt that something was wrong and he couldn't ignore this feeling. When he went outside, he saw something moving under the snow. This was more than the movement of a normal animal. It was as if something was coming from under the ground. As John tried to understand what was happening, suddenly the ground cracked and a huge creature emerged from under the snow. The creature advanced rapidly towards John. John started running for his life, but the creature was faster than him. At the last moment, John returned to his hut and closed the door. The creature hit the door, but John managed to hold the door. Eventually, the creature left and John felt safe. However, he couldn't sleep at all that night, and when morning came, he went outside to find the trace of the creature. He couldn't find the trace of the creature, but nothing was the same after that day. John lived in constant fear that the creature would return. And perhaps the most terrifying thing was that he never knew what happened or where the creature came from. John continued to live in fear of the creature returning. However, one day, something changed. John saw a strange light outside his hut. He went outside to find the source of the light and found something under the snow. This was a trace left by the creature. The trace was a strange stone that emitted some kind of energy. John examined the stone and realized that the creature had come to our world using this stone. John decided to use the stone to send the creature back. However, this was not an easy task. To be able to use the stone, he had to learn a complex spell written in an ancient language. John struggled for days to learn the spell. Finally, he learned the spell and managed to send the creature back using the stone. However, during this process, John learned a lot. He learned that the creature was a harmless being in its own world and had only accidentally come to our world. He also learned that the creature's world was much more complex and interesting than we thought. This experience changed John's life. He was no longer afraid to face his fears and realized that encountering the unknown was actually an opportunity to learn new things. And perhaps most importantly, John no longer felt alone, because he now knew that the universe was much bigger and more complex than we thought. And perhaps out there, beyond the stars, there are other beings asking the same questions as us. John continued to examine the stone to learn more about the creature's world. Inside the stone, he found strange symbols and signs belonging to the creature's world. These symbols were telling the history and culture of the creature's world. John struggled for days to decipher these symbols. Eventually, he realized that the creature's world was much older and advanced civilization than we thought. This civilization had incredible technologies, such as controlling energy and bending space-time. Using this information, John managed to open a portal to the creature's world. When he passed through the portal, he found himself in the creature's world. This world was much larger and more complex than he thought. The creatures were a community that lived in peace and dealt with science and art. John managed to communicate with the creatures and learned a lot from them. He also learned that the creature's world was facing similar problems with our world. Problems such as climate change, depletion of resources, and social injustice were present in both worlds. John worked with the creatures to solve these problems. During this process, both the creatures and John learned a lot from each other. And perhaps most importantly, John no longer felt alone, because he now knew that there were other beings in the universe besides us. During the time John spent in the creature's world, he admired their way of life. They had established a perfect balance between technology and nature. Their world was full of technological advancements, while at the same time preserving the beauty and diversity of nature. John wanted to learn how the creatures established this balance. So, he spent his time with them to get information from their scientists, engineers, and artists. Every moment he spent with them changed John's perspective on his own world. When John returned from the creature's world, he decided to use this information to make his own world a better place. Using the creature's technologies and philosophies, he began to develop environmentally friendly technologies and sustainable lifestyles in his own society. John's work had a big impact on his own society over time. People admired the innovations John brought, and under his leadership, their societies became greener and more sustainable. However, John never forgot the creatures. The time he spent with them reminded him of how big and diverse the universe is, and perhaps most importantly, John no longer felt alone, because he now knew that there were other beings in the universe. Besides us, John's work and achievements began to be recognized worldwide over time. Scientists, engineers, politicians, and even ordinary people wanted to meet with John to learn about his ideas and inventions. John was happy to share his knowledge and experiences, and made many new friends during this process. However, perhaps John's greatest achievement was the friendship he established with the creatures. The time he spent with them reminded him of how big and diverse the universe is, and perhaps most importantly, John no longer felt alone, because he now knew that there were other beings in the universe. Besides us, John maintained his friendship with the creatures and communicated with them regularly. They supported John's efforts to make his world a better place, and shared the knowledge they learned in their own world with him. After that, nothing ever returned to its old order.